On Tuesday, April 2nd, 1974, as Third Doctor actor Jon Pertwee lay on the floor of a BBC Television Centre studio during the filming of Planet of the Spiders, Doctor Who was about to undergo one of its biggest changes yet. Not only was Pertwee leaving the show, so was producer Barry Letts, who had guided the show ever since Jon Pertwee's second serial as the Doctor. Having been producer for 5 years, Letts had become a father figure in the family atmosphere that had developed among the cast and crew of the show. One of Letts' final decisions as producer was to cast out-of-work actor Tom Baker as the new Doctor. Under the new leadership of producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Wholmes, the Tom Baker era would thrive and become one of the most iconic eras of the original run of Doctor Who. However, with the ability for anyone to send in their own scripts and constant production issues, there were a large number of unmade episodes. This is part 1 of the comprehensive history of the Fourth Doctor's untold stories. On December 30th, 1973, during pre-production of Season 12, Christopher Langley submitted Space Station, a story set on a far future space station during a period when mankind is no longer living on Earth. This was commissioned on January 24th, 1974, and intended to take place as the second story of Doctor Who's 12th season. Season 12 was largely constructed around Space Station, with Revenge of the Cybermen designed to reuse the same sets, and the Sontaran experiment written to continue the story thread of humans abandoning Earth. Around late May, however, it was clear that Langley's scripts were unacceptable, and Space Station was officially dropped on June 17th. With the rejection of Space Station, former script editor Terence Dix suggested that Marco Polo writer John Lucarotti write the replacement story, named Ark in Space. This story would use the same Space Station setting as Space Station, in order to save money by having it share sets with Revenge of the Cybermen. The story was officially commissioned in June 1974, with Lucarotti devising the concept of the Ark, a space station housing a huge plot of countryside the size of Kent. The 6-part story concerned the invasion of the Ark by a species called the Delk, a spore-like fungus with separate heads and bodies. The final episode would see the Doctor defeating the Delk leader by hitting it out into space with a golf club, and Lucarotti planned to give each episode a light-hearted title, with Puffball as the title of an early episode and Golf Ball as the title of the final episode, even though individual titles had been long abandoned by this point. Script editor Robert Wholmes and producer Philip Hinchcliffe felt the draft scripts were too ambitious and complicated to realise on the programme's limited budget, and that Lucarotti had over-conceptualised the story. Ark in Space would end up being replaced by a different story by Robert Wholmes, which shared only the setting and name of the previous version. Similarly, Cyberman co-creator Jerry Davis had been approached to bring back the iconic Cybermen for Season 12, initially penning a story titled Return of the Cybermen. This story was reminiscent of previous Cybermen stories, such as the Moonbase and the Invasion, but it was substantially rewritten by script editor Robert Wholmes, with Return of the Cybermen becoming Revenge of the Cybermen. After archivist Richard Bignall discovered the Return of the Cybermen script, a Big Finish audio adaptation of the story was announced to be released in 2021. After completing work on the Season 11 story The Monster of Peladon, experienced Doctor Who writer Brian Hales submitted The Sea of Fear on 9th of March 1974. This story would see the TARDIS land on an island where the ape-like Simiads and the amphibious Xelons are at war. The conflict is being provoked by technicians from Research Incorporated under the command of director Corbin. Research Incorporated has travelled back in time from Earth City in the far future to determine which of the two races is an ancestor of humanity. Once this is known, any citizens of Earth City who manifest the other race's lineage will be purged under the orders of the Great Leader. However, the Great Leader knows he is of Simiad strain, and has planted an agent, Dr. Rogel, amongst the Research Incorporated staff to tip the scales against the Xelons. However, the Doctor discovers that pollution from the Research Incorporated facility is having a degenerative effect on the Simiads, which Corbin tries to cover up by activating a self-destruct mechanism. The Doctor stops him by using the TARDIS TARDIS to scramble the signal, and reveals that the Simiads and Xelons are actually two forms of the same race. It is unknown when or why this story was rejected. Around the middle of 1974, up-and-coming comedy writer Douglas Adams unsuccessfully submitted an untitled storyline about a spaceship known as the B Ark, which leaves Earth carrying the rich but useless members of society on board. Even though this pitch was rejected, Adams would later reuse elements of this story in his hugely successful 1978 radio series The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and its many adaptations into other media. In July 1974, former Evening Standard journalist Louis Griefer was commissioned to write Pyramids of Mars for season 13. This story would have involved museum keepers being chased out of the British Museum by a mummy. It would be revealed that a group is scaring people away in order to gain access to a sarcophagus containing wild rice from thousands of years ago, which the group want to use to seed Mars and make a fortune. However, Griefer fell ill, delivering the scripts late. The story was not what the production team wanted, so they would replace the title with a completely different story by Stephen Harris, although the title Pyramids of Mars would be retained. Long-term Doctor Who writer and former script editor Terence Dicks submitted a story idea in November 1974, named The Haunting, which was commissioned on December 11th. This would have involved the Doctor confronting vampires, but in early 1975, the production team decided it was not what they wanted, abandoning the story and contracting Dicks to write The Brain of Morbius instead. Some elements of The Haunting would later be used in the Vampire Mutation, which became season 18's State of Decay. On January 21st, 1975, former Doctor Who producer Barry Letts was commissioned to write a story titled The Prisoner of Time. Letts based this story on the audition piece he had written for the casting process of the role of Sarah Jane Smith in 1973. Even though scripts were later requested, producer Philip Hinchcliffe was unhappy with the initial draft of episode 1, demanding numerous alterations. Letts was unable to come up with a revised version acceptable for the production team, so The Prisoner of Time was abandoned. At the end of January 1975, former Doctor Who script editor Dennis Spooner submitted Nightmare Planet, a story about a planet where the populace is unknowingly subjugated with drugs in their food and water. Misdeeds are punished with the temporary suppression of the drugs, which causes the people to see terrible monsters all around them. Even though full scripts were requested on February 4th, script editor Robert Wholmes became unhappy with the drug element of Spooner's serial, and it was dropped. In the same month, Dalek creator and Doctor Who legend Terry Nation was contracted to provide the storyline for a serial titled Return to Sukanan on February 13th. However, it was not taken further, and it was dropped when it was decided that Nation should expand the android invasion into full scripts. Around the same time in early 1975, Chris Boucher sent an unsolicited script submission into the production office. This story, called The Silent Scream, was seen as unsuitable for Doctor Who, but led to producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Wholmes working with Boucher on further ideas, such as season 14's The Face of Evil and The Robots of Death. On May 13th, 1975, Robin Smith's story The Beasts of Manzik was formally rejected, although we don't know any details about the plot. 3 days later, on May 16th, Brian Hale submitted The Eyes of Nemesis, a story inspired by the legend of the Wandering Jew. On an alien planet, an old beggar named Lakdem is pursued by Mirren androids, but is immune to their destructive weaponry. The TARDIS materializes and the Doctor is captured by the Mirren commander, Tor. Sarah Jane takes Lakdem back to the TARDIS, where he sheds his skin to become a younger man. Together they rescue the Doctor, and Lakdem sets the coordinates to take the TARDIS to his planet of origin, the secret world of Oinos. There he reveals that he is also an android, one of 13 Watchers created by Death and infused with the power to wander the universe and observe its progress. However, Tor has tracked the TARDIS to Oinos and reveals that he serves the Celestial Toymaker, who seeks Death's power for himself. The Doctor challenges the Toymaker, and the distraction allows Lakdem to accelerate time around the Mirrons, destroying them. Much like many other Brian Hale stories, we do not know why the story was never pursued further. In late 1975, script editor Robert Wholmes received an unsolicited script submission from BBC employee Mark Platt, titled Fires of the Starmind. The story explores the concept that information in the Time Lord libraries is stored on photons, and a sentient star uses this as a means of invading Gallifrey. Wholmes felt that this story lacked action and drama, and was in need of a proper antagonist, rejecting it on December 15th. Even so, he thought that Fires of the Starmind had more potential than most amateur submissions, so he encouraged Platt to continue writing. After numerous attempts, Platt would finally earn a Doctor Who credit on season 26's Ghostlight in 1989, and go on to pen the book Lungbarrow, along with a number of Big Finish audio plays, such as the critically lauded Spare Parts. At some point in either late 1975 or early 1976, dentist and magazine editor David Wiltshire submitted a detailed storyline called The Mendy Fault to the production office, one of the many unsolicited submissions the production office received during the Tom Baker era. The Mendy Fault saw the Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith join the crew of the Thor, an experimental nuclear submarine attempting to set a new depth record by entering the Fault of Mendy in the Bermuda Triangle. The fault turns out to be a passageway to a subterranean world, and the Thor is captured by a race called the Serenians, led by Zor. The Serenians' world is lit by a glowing cloud of gas which is beginning to fade, so Zor wants to use the Polaris missiles aboard the Thor to invade the surface world. He threatens Sarah's life to force the Doctor's cooperation, but she is saved by Nephos, a merman-like Trull. Nephos' people are being mind-controlled by the Serenians, but the Doctor manages to destroy the transmitter, inciting a rebellion. Nephos kills Zor, and the Thor is able to return to the surface world. On August 11th, 1975, Eric Pringle was commissioned to write the first 2 episodes of The Angarath, a story about a race of people offering human sacrifices to sentient rocks. These first 2 episodes were delivered on September 27th. After receiving no reply from the production office as to their suitability, Pringle eventually decided to complete the serial anyway, submitting the final 2 parts on March 10th, 1976. Philip Hinchcliffe had no intention of proceeding further with the story, however, and it was finally dropped on June 23rd. Despite this, several years later, Pringle would write The Awakening for season 21. After his story The Silent Scream was rejected in early 1975, television writer Chris Boucher worked on The Dreamers of Phaedos with producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Wholmes. This story, intended for season 14, was set on a colony ship which has been home to a civilization spanning many generations. It was based on a premise that Hinchcliffe and Wholmes wanted to use, in which people and machines are controlled by a computer that malfunctions. A similar story would form the basis of the Mentor Conspiracy, which included the characters of Leela and Andor, who would eventually appear in the face of evil. The Mentor Conspiracy underwent some development, but was ultimately turned down on October 30th, 1975. After directing The Seeds of Doom for season 13, Douglas Camfield approached producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Wholmes about possibly writing a serial for the next block of episodes, as Camfield also had some scripting credits to his name. Wholmes harboured doubts about the idea, but Hinchcliffe was enthusiastic, so a story titled The Lost Legion was commissioned on January 22nd, 1976, with the assumption that Camfield would also direct it. By this point, Elizabeth Sladen had already indicated that she would be leaving Doctor Who after the second story of season 14, so The Lost Legion was developed with the intention of dramatically writing Sarah Jane Smith out of the programme by killing her off. The story would see the Skarkel and the Kurians, 2 factions of an alien race, in a confrontation at an isolated North African outpost of the French Foreign Legion. At the story's conclusion, the last of the aliens shoots Sarah Jane as it dies, leading to her dying in the Doctor's arms. The Legionnaires build a funeral pyre for Sarah, which burns as the TARDIS dematerialises. When Camfield submitted his first script on February 9th, it did not meet Holmes' approval, who began to groom the Hand of Fear as a possible replacement. Camfield became increasingly late with his submissions, and The Lost Legion was taken off the schedule by the end of March. Camfield continued working on the story, submitting the script for part 4 on September 24th, but by this time the production team had no interest in developing it further, and it was officially replaced with The Hand of Fear, which wrote Sarah Jane off without killing her. After Elizabeth Sladen's departure from Doctor Who in The Hand of Fear, the production team needed a storyline that would introduce a new companion to take her place in the 4th story of season 14. Script editor Robert Wholmes approached the veteran veteran screenwriter Basil Dawson, who submitted a script titled The Gaslight Murders, which centred around murders in Victorian London. The story would introduce a Cockney girl who the Doctor would take under his wing and educate. However, the Gaslight Murders was soon abandoned and replaced by The Face of Evil, although Wholmes used the general framework for the talents of Weng Chiang. In May 1976, Terror of the Zygons writer Robert Banks Stewart wrote a story treatment for the 6-part story The Foe from the Future. This story would be set in a village in the West Country where people are slowly being taken over by an alien influence, along with someone travelling back in time from the future because something has gone wrong with the human race. According to Philip Hinchcliffe, this story was never actually commissioned and never reached the official scripting stages. So when Stewart took up the post of script editor on the Thames television series Rooms, his story was not pursued and The Talents of Weng Chiang was commissioned to close out season 14, using the same basic premise of a villain travelling back in time. The Foe from the Future would later be adapted in January 2012 for Big Finish's The Lost Stories range, and a documentary about the Unmade serial was created for the DVD range, released with The Talents of Weng Chiang and the season 14 Blu-ray. With the conclusion of season 14, Tom Baker's portrayal of the Doctor had become cemented as the most popular take on the character yet, thanks to the brilliant partnership of Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes behind the scenes. Alongside the partnership of Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen on the screen, Doctor Who was a must-watch on Saturday night television. However, Sladen's departure in The Hand of Fear produced new difficulties on screen, due to Baker's contentious relationship with Sladen's replacement, Louise Jameson. Along with this, Hinchcliffe and Holmes would be leaving the show sooner than expected, signalling a new era under producer Graham Williams. However, even though the show would introduce robot dogs and Time Lord companions, the presence of untold stories would linger on, and one such story would become the most infamous of them all. And I'd like to give a special thank you to my gold level patrons, Steph McNever Miller and Mark Hip Old Guy Taylor. Thank you a lot for your support.